All right, we're sitting here with Bob Lasher, who is a Pearl Harbor veteran. And Bob, we'll start with, what branch of service did you serve in?
Navy.
Okay. What unit? Do you remember?
Well, I was on a battleship, West Virginia at Pearl Harbor,
When did you enlist?
1940, August 23rd.
When did you get out?
22nd of August, 1946.
So you served a good 4 years.
I enlisted 6 years.
Yeah, 6 years. What was your highest rank?
Radioman, second class.
What was that?
Radioman.
Radio man.
I call myself a jerk.
Why is that?
I didn't amount to much.
So tell us about Pearl Harbor.
Well, I enlisted in 1940, so I was in there a year and 3 or 4 months before Pearl Harbor. So we went on a troop train across there, all sailors, to Long Beach, and got aboard the West Virginia there. Others got in other parts of the fleet, you know. But I was put aboard the West Virginia, and I was on the deck force. And we were there for a week or two, then we headed up the west coast, up to Bremerton to go into dry dock. I don't know whether you've ever seen a battleship in dry dock, but that battleship, if it sat here in town, one end would be up by the bank, the other would be down by 5 corners. They're big.
Yeah.
And when you see them out of water, there's more underwater than there is above. That's quite a sight, but we had to go over the side and scrape the sides, see, scrape the blisters and the whatever was on there, rust and one thing and then. But going down was easy because we went down in floats. We went in water, let us in there, we floated in, set on those, and they closed it. Then they pumped the water out, see, so they can work on it. Well, going down, scraping it was easy because they had pontoons you stand on, and it goes down with the water, and you scrape your spot right in front of you. There's, gosh, there must have been 600 or 800 guys, so we didn't have any trouble. All you had to do was just your own strip. Went all the way to the bottom, but none of us had been 4 stories up in the air on a platform on planks. Now we had to paint it. Well, you had to let yourself down, had planks that overlap like that and a loop around and hooked up around the deck. When you paint this, and you take that and unhook it and let it down, and I mean, whole length of the ship, about 4 stories in the air over concrete. We had belts on, so if we fell, we'd only go so far, but that at least 2 planks would go. If run ropes, that 2 of the planks would go because they overlap like that. If one went, they both would go down. They'd dump about 10 guys, and they'd be hanging there on those safety belts. Then they had to figure out how to get them off of that, get them down without being hurt. But luckily, nobody slipped. We went the distance, but boy, that was scary. I'd never been 4 stories up over concrete with nothing but that rope wasn't any bigger than your finger hanging onto your belt around you. But then we painted it. We left there. After we got that done, we were there a couple of weeks, and then we came back down to Long Beach and for Christmas in California there. Then we headed for Pearl Harbor, for Hawaii, and we got there. And what we did there before the war, we'd be in port maybe a week or two, and make liberty there in Honolulu. It was just a little ways from Honolulu. Catch a bus to Honolulu. And of course they had a big Navy base there, you know, the sub base and the dry docks, and it was quite a nice harbor for that kind of stuff, all right out in the middle of the Pacific, see. So then we'd go out and maybe we'd practice, you know, shoot the guns and tow battleships and things like that. And I want to tell you, I hated that because we used a 3-inch cable, steel cable, and they kept it down below on a reel. Everybody turned out for that job. We had to pull that up off of the reel, and it was all graphite because salt water will rust that. It's all graphite. Of course, we wore as old clothes as we could find, But it wasn't, your clothes weren't any good
Yeah.
after it was over, you throw them away anyway, and wore gloves. Then they bring them out, they have a loop on it. They tie, first they'd shoot like a clothesline over to the other ship. They'd tie it onto a 1-inch rope, and they'd pull that over, and then they'd hook it onto that cable, and some wench over there a deck wench would pull it on over, and then we'd tow the other battleship. See, I hated that job because handling that thing was an all-day job because you had to put it back.
Coil it.
that cable was right around the ship because it had to go a long way, you see, but everybody had about maybe 4 feet to lift. You know, shoulder to shoulder. Boy, we got covered with graphite. I hated that because it gets on the decks and then you got to clean that up. Now, they were teak decks, so you had to scrape it, that grease off, get it all good again, and then the job, that was wood with tar in between it, waterproof. And of course we had to mop that every day. I suppose you heard the saying, you could eat your dinner off the decks on the Navy. It was just about true because they mopped it every day and holy stoned it. That was one of the jobs of the deck force. And it was nice because you got to travel and go places you'd never see again or before, and in that respect. But I hated those things because they're repetitious, you know. And every time you pull in, the officers would want canvas put over their quarter. They're on the quarter, underneath the quarterdeck. See, well, it was hot down there. See, that's warm weather down there. Never winter down there. That's summer all year long. They wanted those canvas awnings put over the tail end to keep getting so hot. It used to make me so mad because every time we come in, we had to put them up and take them down again when we went to sea. We go in and out there maybe a couple weeks at a time, back and forth. We saw all those islands there. There's 7 Hawaiian islands, you know, and there's a lot more. There's a lot of farms on that big island. I mean, they grow pineapples there and
Macadamia nuts.
yeah, everything, and they even have cattle ranches there and these sugar canes. And that's another thing. It used to make us so mad to harvest those things. They look just like cornfields, and to harvest them, they set them on fire to burn off the leaves. Well, that ash would come right down. We kept those ships all perfect, you know, clean.
Yeah.
Every time we come in, they'd be burning one of those, and they'd go up there and come right down on the ship. And we had a job to do. We had to clean the ship. These things were aggravating, you know, because anywhere else you wouldn't have to do that, you know. Well, that was the kind of life we were leading before the Japs attacked. Now, Sunday morning there's been a lot of talk about nobody being aboard. Well, we were aboard because you had to be. I mean, only half of the guys could go on liberty at a time. The other half stayed aboard anytime. And liberty started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so they were aboard all right, except for the people. There's a base there, and the sailors. You've seen pictures of all those guys in whites putting up the flag, and
Yep.
band playing, and the Japs are raiding at the same time. Everybody wondering what's going on. Well, that was the situation. But I was down on the 3rd deck, below the waterline, when they attacked, and a guy that I knew when I was on deck, I got down into the print shop and was working in there when they attacked. And a guy I'd known on the deck, he shoved his head in the hatch and he said, "General Quarter, Jap air raid," and I could see by his face he wasn't kidding. They were damage control. They had the passageways on both sides of the ship and compartments where they had print shops and all the different sailmakers and all that sort of thing. It had offices down there, I mean places where you worked. We had printing presses, of course. We had one of the best in the Navy because they always wanted us to do the job. You'll be surprised the things they had in there that brought in for spy work. And our chief could make pictures of it, see. Of course, nobody knows that, but anyway, we weren't at war, you know. So, all of those compartments have watertight doors. That's called watertight integrity. See, because if you get hit, you don't want the water to go the whole length. You want to confine it where the hit is, and then you can keep going. See, so they were damage control crew, and he stuck his head in there and he said, "General quarters, Jap air raid." So we jumped to, and about that time they hit us with, I think, at least 5 torpedoes. Now that wouldn't happen if we'd known they're coming, because they have floats that they put out there with screens so torpedoes can't hit them
Right.
if they're at war. But we weren't at war, so those weren't in place. Japs come right in and torpedoed us before we even know what was going on. See, we got hit about 5 times. I spent my time getting up and down, but I was lucky we were on the wrong side of the ship. We were on the other side from where they hit. You could feel the concussion. Felt like somebody hit you side the head with a board. But I'd get up and we had type that were in trays that you had to set type, And the ship began to tip up like that because the water was coming in one side. All I could think of was keep those trays from falling. I was holding the trays up so they wouldn't dump all those pipe print on the floor. We hadn't ever been to war. We were out of high school, and here we're being hit with those torpedoes. And it wasn't what you didn't even get scared. You're too surprised to get scared, You're just, well, what's going on? Well, anyway, we went out into the passageway where the damage control guys were, and we got hit with a big bomb right down by the bridge, and it killed the captain, Captain Benyon. Now, before he died, he passed a word to abandon ship. If he hadn't passed that word, you're not supposed to open those doors until you get orders, because that can sink the ship. See, of course, in the harbor, it wouldn't sink very far, but it would settle down on the bottom. But he passed a word to abandon ship. So we got the word, and so the petty officers opened it up, and we went on up and got up on the quarterdeck. Bob Lefebvre from New Hampshire, he and I went through boot camp together, and he was a printer, and he got me in there. We went up there together, and of course, not knowing what was going on, I had my wool blanket rolled up, and I was carrying that with me. I don't know why. I was carrying that with me, and I let go of that after I got up there. Got on the quarterdeck, and that's either the bomb that hit number 3 turret or the Arizona blowing up. It was either one or the other. It was an awful explosion. But you see, there was a big ventilator about maybe 10-foot square there, and that took any shrapnel that might have come from it. It didn't hit us. We stood there, but we felt the blast, the hot air from the blast. I still don't know whether it was Arizona. They were at our rear. I don't know whether it was the Arizona blowing up or the bomb that hit number 3 turret. But anyway, there was a guy, a warrant officer, hanging on to it with one hand, and the ship was tipping up because the water went in on one side. Now, there's a guy that I've known, I've seen at the reunion, said that he shifted the water to the other side so it leveled off. That's one of the things they do when you get hit on one side. If the water's tipping you, you can flood this side and bring it back, see, so it won't tip over.
Right.
Now, the Oklahoma sat just ahead of us, and she tipped right over, bottom side up, trapping all those guys down below. That was a terrific business right there. A lot of guys lost their lives there, and I can tell you about that. But the warrant officer stood there hanging on there. They said, "Get off the ship, it's just a target." So he and I dove in the water, and we went out, and there was motor launches. They're about 50 feet long. They sit up about that high out of the water. They're used for cargo and stuff like that. They have looks like a car motor in the middle, and they use them to lug things back and forth. And he and I got there, and we climbed in that. Of course, neither one of us had run that motor before, but at the same time, a coxswain that was in the 4th Division there, he had run them, so he got aboard and he started up, and we went around the harbor there picking up survivors that were in the water, and of course most of them were covered with oil from the leaks and the the ships. So you couldn't tell, there was blood, but you couldn't tell where the wound was because it mixed with the oil, you couldn't tell where it was. But we pulled him in and got it all we could find. And this guy Pruitt, he weighed about 300 pounds, and he was my boss on deck. And he was in the water there, and he said, "Give me a hand, Lasher." So now we're up that far out of the water, and he weighed about 300 pounds. And I'd say by his looks, they called him Jap, his nickname, but his name was Pruitt. And he was an old timer, see, but when the pontoon, a bomb hit the number 3 turret where we had a spotter plane set on a shoot off, you know, they use them for spotting and stuff like that. It hit that, and the pontoon come out and it hit him in the back. And he was in the water there, but he was swimming. He said, "Give me a hand, Lasher." So another guy and I reached down and get a hold of him, but we get him up just so far, and he was all oil, you know, and it slipped. Kept slipping. We couldn't get him up over that side of the boat there. So we tied him to the side, and we towed him over to sub base where we all got off. And then we went into sub base. Of course, we were all covered with oil, and because we'd been in the water, and that slick was on the water there. If you've seen pictures of Pearl Harbor, you see the West Virginia burning. You see the water, a lot of smoke. Well, see, that oil caught fire after a while, but we got out of there before it caught fire. Or at least it wasn't burning where we were. And so we went into the shower room there at some base, and we had to wash with kerosene because we had all covered with oil. We washed ourselves. I had oily hair for a month after that. It was in my hair, you know. You get sunlight on oily hair and it turns red. I was a brunette, but that's just one of the things that happened. But after we got the oil off, then we had to wash the kerosene off. Of course, we didn't have any clothes. See, they were all aboard ship. So they opened up the lucky bag. Now, I don't know whether you've ever heard of the lucky bag. They say you're lucky if you get anything back. They find clothing and shoes and different things around. They don't know what they brought. They throw them in a lucky bag. And if people want them, they go search and find. They got their name on them, you know. So they call it the lucky bag. So the guy that was running things there, he opened that lucky bag, and we all got clothes to wear out of there. So we had dungarees on, really. And we worked around there. Well, that night, this was kind of interesting. Pruitt, the guy we pulled out, he was walking around there, he just had a sore back. But we happened to sleep in the barracks that night. See, you never knew whether the Japs were going to land or not, so the Marines and the Army were putting up defenses around there, you know, with machine guns and different things. They didn't know whether they were going to land or not. They were afraid they were going to, but they didn't, of course. But so they had these bunks 4 high, and I was up on top, and Pruitt was on the bottom, and somebody was shooting outside, you know, hair trigger people, those guys that weren't used to war either, and see something move, and blah, 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 you know. So I come off the top. I didn't want any bullets coming through the roof hit me. I come off the top down the floor. I laid on the floor, and Pruitt was laying in the bottom bunk. He said, "What's the matter, Lasher?" You're an old timer, you know. He said, "What's the matter, Lasher?" I said, "I didn't want to get hit with any bullets." Well, that was just that night. For a couple of days, we worked around there loading ships with ammunition, different things. And I want to say something right now before it slips. Maybe you know it, maybe you don't. But they didn't do as much damage as they thought they did. All of those battleships, the newest one was the West Virginia, and she was built in 1923. All of them were old. And we had 6 carrier task forces out there. And they weren't in that day. They were out at sea. They didn't get hit. I've never heard that mentioned. Just as soon as we got organized, we went right out to sea, went after the Japs. Nobody knows that. They know it was a terrible disaster from everybody's viewpoint. But the battleships took the hits, but they didn't use them anyway. They're slow. They used them for shore bombardment and stuff like that, or a big slugfest with another ship. But it was mostly the first few months there was just carriers sending planes at each other. We against them and them against us. And every now and then we'd go down and we'd bomb some base. Got all the way down to Coral Sea. People, I don't think that was ever mentioned. See, that by bombing those battleships, we lost some men, of course, but they didn't hurt the fleet, the battle fleet, as much as they thought they did, because we still had those 6 carriers: the Wasp, the Hornet, the Lexington, the Saratoga, Enterprise, and Yorktown. We had 6 of them, and they all had maybe 3 cruisers and maybe 6 or 7 destroyers to screen them. When you go to sea, they'd have the screen out there to pick up anything, submarines or anything that might try to attack them. So we weren't really out of the war like people might have thought we were. Of course, we couldn't afford to get caught again because the Japs had a big fleet, and they had good carriers and good pilots and all that stuff. So we couldn't afford to get trapped somewhere and get hit again and get hurt, because the West Coast would be wide open. We had to be there. So if anybody was wondering where we were, that's where we were. But anyway.
Now, you have an interesting story because you were reported dead back stateside. They reported you as dead to your family.
Well.
How did that come about?
Well, I'll get around to that.
Okay.
But anyway, we went to sea and we went down into the South Seas. And about being reported lost. Now, Nemitz was in Washington at the time. He was the commander out there after a while. He came out and took over out there, the Admiral Nemitz, Chester Nemitz, you've heard of him. He was a good man, but he was in Washington at the time. We all turned our names in at Pearl. When we got over the base, we turned our names in. Of course, they sent them back to Washington. But I think they got them mixed up with Casualty, because my name was, "We're sorry to inform you your son was lost at war at Pearl Harbor. Sorry," that sort of thing, you know. And I've got the
telegram.
Yeah, telegram. My mother got it, and it went about a week before they discovered their error. So then Nemitz signed the first one. Of course, he got into the war after that, but somebody else signed the second one and come back. We hope we didn't it's disinformation, you know, but it has been discovered your son is alive and well. He'll get in touch soon. Now, we were at sea, see. I didn't even know this happened. See, I'm out there in the sea with the rest of the bunch. And these tankers would bring oil out to us. We'd be 5,000 miles way out in the middle there. And they'd bring tankers. Now, I've always wondered how in the world they made it, because usually they were alone. A good Lord, a submarine could drop them easy, you know, because they didn't have any protection that I could see. I'd see them coming over the horizon, and they'd say, "That's our fuel." So they'd fuel up. They had big pipes that they'd fill you up. Well, they also brought us our mail. Now, we'd been at sea a couple months, see. Everybody wondered, where's the Navy? Well, that's where we were. But they brought our mail out, and here I had some back mail, and I was opening. I was reading my own obituary. I stood right up on the back of my neck, you know. I didn't know that had happened. But it was a mistake, and I've always figured they got the wrong list. They got the survivor list instead of the casualty list. They thought it was a casualty list, so they told, probably other guys got the same thing.
There was one gentleman from Perryville who died on the Arizona, and in the same paper where you were reported missing, Laverne Austin.
Austin. Yep. Yeah, I know him well. Yeah, went to school with him.
Yep, and he was reported missing, but they never finished it for almost 3 or 4 weeks before they finally came back and said he was on the Arizona.
Oh well, dead. They took a beating because their magazines exploded. It killed an awful lot of them. We had a guy aboard that was on it that made it. He come aboard our ship, and few of them made it, you know, but a lot of them were lost. We lost 105 men ourselves.
So what ship were you on when you went out to sea then?
The Phelps, destroyer Phelps 360, DD 360 Phelps, destroyer.
Okay.
Maybe 150 or 200 men at the most. Ours was bigger than most because it was squadron leader. Most of the destroyers weren't as big as we were.
Okay. So you go off to sea.
Yeah.
Where do you go first?
Well, we head down to Bougainville and Salomon and Lae, L-A-E, and we were raiding their airfields down there with our planes. And now this was the first battle we were in after Pearl Harbor. I don't know where their carriers were because they would have hit us if they'd been there. But they sent 18 twin-engine bombers out. Those are high-level bombers, twin engines. Probably about 5 men at least in them. And they sent them out to attack us. Well, of course, our radar picked them up, so we sent our fighters out to meet them. And that sea was just like glass down there. That's beautiful. That's nice to go to if you want to go somewhere. Really nice and peaceful. Pacific is the name. That means peace, I guess. But anyway, we were watching, and there'd be smoke there on the horizon, and then another smoke over here, another smoke over here. As they were coming to us, we didn't know whether they were our planes or they were smoking and shot down, or whether they were Japs. Well, it happened they were Japs. Our fighters were shooting them down. By the time they got to us, about 3 come over us, and we were shooting up at them with anti-aircraft fire. And our fighters were diving right through that anti-aircraft fire, attacking those planes. You could see them. We couldn't shoot at them because I was on a 5-inch gun, and they weren't built to shoot up. They were built to shoot out sideways, see, for shore batteries or another ship or something, not the planes coming straight up. So we got to watch it more or less. And I think there was only 3 of them left when they got over us. And down one came, he come right down, I was watching out, we were in a turret, see, and I was watching outside, a lot of shooting going on. The whole fleet was opening up because other ships could shoot up, and they 40 and 20 millimeters. But this jet plane come down in pieces, and his pilot was falling right down with him, but his chute didn't open. It fluttered behind him like this, but he come right down in the water. During a battle, you don't stop and pick anybody up, you know, whether they're yours or theirs. We didn't pick him up. I don't know what happened to him, but he hit the water. His chute wasn't open. I mean, it was partly open. You know how they fail once in a while and they don't open up. So, finally, by the way, before I go any farther, you probably have O'Hare Air Base there in Chicago. That's named after the guy that made Ace that day. O'Hare was one of our pilots. He shot down 6 planes that day, made Ace. He came back and sold bonds for a while, then went back out there and got killed. But they named O'Hare Airport after him. And I don't know whether this is true or not, but they claim his father was mafia. But he wasn't. He was a Navy officer. And he got killed when he went back out. But he got made Ace the first day, first battle we were in. He got 6 of them. He was telling how he did it, you know. But anyway, there was 1 plane left, and he come down, circled around, he come right across our fantail like this, heading for the carrier. He was going to crash into the carrier. And we only had 50 calibers at that time. We hadn't got our 20s and 40s yet. They came later. They were the better. They'd explode when they hit. They'd explode like a hand grenade. See, you hit a plane with them, and you could figure he'd pretty well hit. But we only had 50 calibers on the fantail there, and that guy from Kentucky, his name was Cox, Walter Cox. He was back there, and they had handlebars on him, you know. I don't know whether you know this, but every 5th bullet is tracer. You can see it.
Yep. So you're
like
sure,
fire is going. And he was putting that tracer right on that plane as it went by, raking it from one end to the other. It was heading right for the carrier, and it dropped right in the sea between us and the carrier. So we didn't, nobody got hit that day, not the ships. And we got all of them. all 18 of them. We lost one pilot and 2 planes. The funny part of it was, the pilot we saved, we were plane guard. We'd be behind the carrier. If anybody went down, we'd pick them up to save our pilots. Well, he came alongside and he landed in the water. He'd been hurt. His plane had been shot up. He landed right in the water, climbed out on the wing, we picked him up. He said, it's the first time I was ever glad to see this ship. He was a former officer on our ship, got to be a pilot and went into the Air Corps. I mean, the Navy Air Corps.
Yep.
Well, the first thing he said when I pulled him aboard, he said, it's the first time I was ever glad to see this ship. But the other guy, I saw him. He was up there high and they were shooting anti-aircraft. I don't know whether we got him or whether the enemy did, but he was flying along like this, and all of a sudden he come down at full speed, and he hit that water head on. I watched him all the way, and he just pulverized him, you know. He was probably dead before he hit the water. But that's the only man we lost that day, and they lost 18 times 5, around nearly 100. Because those crews on those bombers usually they had a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, and a couple machine gunners, at least, on those bombers. So they had at least 5 guys. So that, we were feeling pretty good now. After Pearl Harbor, we were feeling good. That first battle, we lost only 1 man. I don't know whether that's ever reported that way or not, but that's the way I saw it. But we had a guy from Texas, name was Buford Young, and he looked like Mr. Clean on that bottle, you know, that bald-headed guy but he was short. He maybe kind of husky, like not as heavy as you are, but he was broad-shouldered, and he was from Shamrock, Texas, and he was on the gun. It was next to where you could look out and see what was going on. Very serious, you know. Now that wasn't normal for him because he was a joker. I was over here loading the gun, see, and I could look right across to him, just sitting there like you're looking at me. He's here and you're me. And we had the gun captain sitting up here. He had that periscope, looked through the periscope, top of the turret, and he had phones on, hooked to the bridge, so to get orders on what to do and everything. He was a turret captain. It was Sassy. He's from down Norfolk here, but I've got letters from him, but he made officer after a while, but he's a first-class gunner then. And this guy sitting there out the window, he looked very serious. He's looking out at the window, what was going on. There's a lot of shooting and a lot of noise and planes falling all over the place. And pretty soon he looked around. This guy's name was Sassy, S-A-S-S-E. He looked up at Sassy and said, you know, Sass? I won't use the words he used, but he said, you know, Sass, those blacks are going to keep fooling around till somebody gets killed. The whole turret just roared, you know, because everything was so serious. And that Texan come up with that. Those guys are going to keep fooling around till somebody gets killed. That was the first battle. I guess he was right. But he left the ship and became a cook on a submarine, and they never come back. He didn't make it back. The submarine was lost. I stopped in, I took a trip down to Texas to see some relatives one time, and I went through Shamrock, and somehow or other in my way, I'd lost my gas tank cover, the thing that covers the gas tank. So I stopped there at a gas station to see if they had one. I got a tank of gas, and I asked him, you got it? He said, there's a bunch you can try. I tried one, it worked, so I got one. I looked at the guy and I said, your name wouldn't be Young, would it? He said, well, yes, how'd you know? I said, I was in the Navy during the war, and I said, I knew a guy named Buford Young. He said, that's my cousin. He looked like him, see? That's why I asked him, and it happened to be his cousin. Before I could say anything, he said, you know, he didn't make it, you know. The town was right down there. This is a thoroughfare. He just dropped down into town. I was going down there and see his folks and see how he was and everything. His cousin told me, he said, he didn't make it. he was on a submarine and he didn't come back. Well, I knew he'd gone aboard a sub, but I didn't know that they didn't get back. You know, they go to sea and they sink. Nobody knows where they are. They know where some of them are, but some of them, you never know what happened. But so I went on. I didn't stop to see him, but I wish I had, but I didn't. So I know what happened to him. Sassy down here, I wrote him a letter, and he'd made lieutenant commander before he got out. He was a first class gunner when I knew him. In fact, he knew how to. He was a saddle maker in civilian life, and I had a knife. You always want to carry a knife because you always need them. But I had a folding knife with bone handle, and I didn't have a sheath for it. I asked him one day. I said, "Will you make a sheath for it?" I had a piece of leather, and he just took a knife, cut it around. He said, "No," he said, "just sew that end together." I sewed it up and put it on my belt, and I carried that all through the war. Didn't have to use it, but you always need a knife because you never know when you have to cut a rope or defend yourself. Well, now let's see. That brings us up to the first battle. Now, if you want an extenuated story, I mean, I was in 11 battles, so you'll have to be patient. I won't try to overdo it. I'll just scan. Now, you probably knew about Midway being the turning point. Well, and you probably knew that Yamamoto planned Pearl Harbor, that Jap, an admiral. And after Pearl Harbor, his officers were toasting him at a party. Because of Pearl Harbor, they called it a very good victory, see. And I don't know, maybe you know the story. If you do, why I'll stop. People know these things because it came out after the war, but they toasted him and congratulated him on such a success there at Pearl Harbor. And he said, "I'm afraid that your congratulations are premature." He said, "If we don't win this war in 6 months, we'll lose it." The young officers were surprised. Why, Admiral, we destroyed their fleet. Well, he said, "I'm afraid we just awoke a sleeping giant with terrible resolve. If we don't win this war in 6 months, we'll lose it." You know, Midway was just exactly six months. That's when we turned it around. We got 4 of their carriers. I was on a destroyer on a 5-inch gun. I had my sights right on the Yorktown, our carrier. We had 3 of them there. We got the word that they were going to attack Tiger. You know the story about Tiger? Mm-hmm. That was the code name for this upcoming battle. The Japanese used it. Well, we were breaking the Japanese code, see. Apparently they didn't know it. But our intelligence came up with the fact there's going to be an attack somewhere in the Pacific. It's going to be a big one. And the name of the operation is Tiger. So Nimitz was in Honolulu at the time, at Pearl Harbor, and they knew this, see, and we were down in the South Sea, so we steamed back up to Pearl. Nobody went in. We knew, see, 80% of the population of the Hawaiian Islands were Japanese, and there was bound to be a few spies there, or at least we didn't want to take the chance, so we didn't go in the harbor. We stayed out to sea and went in one at a time, got fuel and what we needed, ammunition and stuff, built up, got all that done. And then Nimitz didn't know where Tiger was. I don't know whether you remember this, but Guadalcanal and the Aleutians were starting at the same time. Japanese wanted to lure our fleet away from Midway, but Nimitz didn't fall for it. He said, "I don't think that's Tiger. I think it's something else." So he went up to Midway. You know the story? Mm-hmm. He went up to Midway and he told them, "Send me a message that your desalination units have broken down. You need some parts. Send it in plain language." So we went back to Pearl and they did what he said. There was a Japanese submarine that they knew about that was off Midway, and he was reporting to Tokyo all the time. But of all things, he's copying our messages, see, especially the ones that are plain language, he could read them. So he sent a message to Tokyo. Tiger is having trouble with his salt units, this desalination unit. See, those islands are low and it's all salt water, so you have to have something that'll take the salt out of them to drink. We had them aboard ship.
Right.
That's the only way we could drink the water. It had to be desalinated. Well, Midway had them, but he sent a message to Tokyo and he said, Tiger, that's how Nimitz knew that Midway was Tiger. Knew they were going to attack Tiger. So we left and we went up north of Midway and waited. When they hit Midway, we hit them. We got 4 of their best carriers, I guess you know that. Turned it around because they left and we chased them all the way out of there. But now, if they hadn't broke that code, see, the Japs probably figured that we'd send the fleet up the Aleutian because they landed at Attu and Kiska. They took those 2 islands up off of Alaska. Now, that's not very far from the Asian landmass, which the Japanese had conquered. They had air bases there. That's another story. But Nimitz didn't fall for that. He figured Tiger was something else and he guessed right. Of course, that turned the battle around. Then Guadalcanal, that was an awful fight too. That was they were going to try to take Australia because the Australian army was in Britain waiting for D-Day, same as ours was, or most of it. And so I guess they figured they could take Australia. They wouldn't have much opposition. Well, Guadalcanal was an island right along, and you know that barrier reef there would stop anything from the east. So they were going to go up from the top, in the Darwin, that area, and attack from there through New Guinea. But they had this Guadalcanal and Tarara for air bases. See, they were building them, but they hadn't landed any troops. So we went in there and we took those 2 islands. Boy, that started a battle. I mean, we lost. The first night we got caught again, just like we did at Pearl Harbor. We weren't ready. But we knew they were coming this time. And the officers told the men, now, get some rest. We're going to have a battle in the morning because they could judge by the speed of the ships that were coming that they'd be there in the morning. Well, the Japs, true to the Jap nature, they upped speed during the night and they got there about 2 or 3 in the morning. All of our guys were just sitting there, see, most of them sleeping, resting. Of course, they always had a gun crew on. They always had a watch on one gun all the time during the war. That's just for emergencies, but all ships did. But when they came down there, they were on another side of an island, so our radar didn't pick them up. They come around there and they shot star shells. That lights up the whole area just like daylight and started shooting. We lost 3 cruisers that night, and Chicago was damaged and the San Francisco was damaged, and 2 Australian cruisers went down, 5 cruisers down. Now that's a big loss. And the skipper got us back on the fantail the next day and he was grim, because that was quite, and besides, we knew they were coming. They still caught us flat-footed, see. Guys were running to the battle station in their underwear because they were in their bunks. But they were told to get rested. We're going to have a battle in the morning. Well, the Japs got there a couple hours ahead of time. But their job was to shoot up that marine landing that landed that day. Well, they couldn't do it because they were busy with our fleet, and their admiral turned and beat it because he knew we had carriers there. And they just got shellacked at Midway, so he left, and he got fired because the Marines the next day landed all their equipment. Well, you know the rest. That was one hell of a battle down there. It lasted a month or 2, and they called that area Iron Bottom Sound because there's so many ships on the bottom there. The Japs were trying to land troops, and we were trying to fight them off. And heck, they were fighting with PT boats and everything against landing craft. They're right up close, you know. I've heard guys tell about it that were there. I was with the carrier. Now we were on the destroyer with the carriers out waiting for daylight. We'd come in with the planes during the daylight. But this guy left, and so after that they just come down at night because they didn't have carriers. Or apparently they didn't have any to replace the ones that got lost, but at least they weren't there. And they come down every night and they bombard our boys on the beach. That's where Les was. Les Smith, he's the guy that he and I buddied, pal around with. And so, well, you know what happened there. So that last night, we lost more ships than they did there. But when the smoke cleared, why, we were there and they were gone. And then we went up the Aleutians. We were going to take back Attu and Kiskasee. Well, they happened. I guess that was just a probe to draw our fleet away from Midway, but it didn't work. So they had troops on Attu. So we went up there and we landed some Marines and Army guys, and we had the fleet with us, the heavies, the cruisers and battleships and stuff. And of course, they'd bombard for the land for the Marines to get them started, you know, give them help. Then they left. They left us there with a gunboat to just, when the Marines wanted some help with artillery, we'd give it to them. We'd knock out things or obstacles that were in their way. So we were out there. We were out about a mile in the harbor, patrolling back and forth. We had a gunboat with us, smaller, and we're only doing about 7 knots. Of course, I had been with the gunners at first, but now I was a radioman. I was in a radio shack, but I was off watch. I knew the gunners, so I was up on that gun mount, the 40s, the 40 millimeters, anti-aircraft guns. I was up there visiting with those guys, and we had planes, Army planes, at Adak and Dutch Harbor. And they'd come down every now and then and help bomb things there on Attu. And so we were standing there visiting, and suddenly 15 planes appeared out of the clouds, and we thought they were our planes from Dutch Harbor or Adak, and we were just watching them, and all of a sudden they kind of turned around, come right at us like this. I don't know whether you've ever heard of wing tanks or not. They're what the fighters' planes or any of those planes wear on their wings with gas in them so they can go farther. And when they get there, they drop them. They drop their wing tanks so they can do battle with their regular gas supply. They just use them so they can go farther. Well, they started dropping, and we thought they were wing tanks. We were watching them, and pretty soon those wing tanks started coming at us. Torpedoes. There we sat. We weren't hardly moving, and they were coming right at us. 15 of them, 15 planes coming right down there, dropping our torpedoes. We took 7 of them, and the gunboat took 8 of them. But you see, they thought the fleet was there, and they set their torpedoes deep for the big ships. They went right under us. That was the closest place, the closest time I come to getting killed. Because I don't think, those Jap torpedoes were the best in the war, and one of them could have sunk that destroyer and the gunboat. You know, they were powerful. They could knock a destroyer out like that. Can you imagine 7 of them?
Yeah.
We'd have been just a puff of smoke. I don't know, maybe somebody on the bridge might have escaped because they're up way, but I was only 5 feet above the water line. I was visiting with the gunners, and when I saw they were torpedoed, I jumped down onto the main deck. My battle station was a cubicle, maybe 8-foot square, emergency radio. I opened that door, that was my battle station, so I went in there, and there was 3 guys, radiomen in there playing cards. Nobody knew,
Right.
see, nobody knew they were Japs till they started dropping those torpedoes. And I told them, I said, there's a Jap air raid, and they jumped up and went out, went onto their battle station. One guy come back in, they called me Old Man Lash, because my name was Lasher, they dubbed it Lash. The guy from Missouri said, "Good God, Lash," he said, "I've been wading knee-deep in machine gun bullets." They were strafing, see, as they went by, they were strafing us. He come back in, waited a minute, then he run out and went on, but that was kind of funny, but they didn't hit anybody. They strafed us. We had one radioman that got hit right here. He was sitting at his desk typing, you know, copying code. That's what we did. Radioman copied code constantly, day in and day out. And he was sitting there, earphones on, and the bullet came through this side of the superstructure there. Now there wasn't much armor plating. There was aluminum, about maybe a half an or a quarter inch thick. The bullet come right through there and hit his desk, bounced up through the typewriter, and hit him right here. His name was Samadowski. He was from down Pennsylvania here. I wrote to him recently, or a little while ago. I wrote to him. I saw his name in one of the. We get a bullhorn. It's a thing from the ship. They put out one every couple months, and you're keeping track of the funerals and what guys are doing. I saw his name in there, but it wasn't Samadowski. He changed it to Shamlin, but he announced it in the book. He said, "Tell the boys my name is Shamlin now." The Samadowski was too long, so I shortened it up to Shamlin. So I said, "My God, that's the guy in the Radio Shack that got hit right here." I reminded him, I wrote and reminded him of it, and he wrote back, and we had a good conversation. But you should have, he got up, you know, he got hit right there, just enough to break the skin right in the middle of his chest. He hung his earphones up and got up. And I won't say what he said because, you know, guys, they say things when things happen, but it was funny. That's the closest anybody got hit that time. But that was also the closest we all could have died right there because we were a mile from shore. They told us we could only live 7 minutes in that water because that was cold. It was practically freezing. They told us if you get in the water you can live 7 minutes. That's about all. Maybe somebody got on a life raft, but with 7 torpedoes, I doubt it. I think everything would have been blown to smithereens along with us. Now, maybe the people on the bridge might have escaped the explosion because they're up high. But that gunboat wouldn't have had a chance. They're not much bigger than a motorboat, you know. But anyway, that was our experience up there in the Aleutians, and probably the closest I come to getting killed. Or all of them, as far as that goes. I don't think any of us, unless the Army or Marines sent a boat out to pick us up, and they were a mile away. I don't know, they probably wouldn't have known it happened. They'd know something happened, but if they happened to be looking, but they were busy, they were fighting inland there. Well, that takes care of that. Now, we come back to the States. We were at sea 5 months without going ashore. And on a small ship where everybody was about, I don't know, I imagine it was somewhere between 150 and 200. I don't know whether you probably have heard about the storms they had out there, those hurricanes or typhoons, I guess you call them. We hit 2 of them while I was in the Navy. And the first one, Halsey got called to the carpet for this. They had news that it was coming, so they steered away from it. But sometime after that, the tornado changed directions, and we ran right straight into it. We lost 3 destroyers that night from the weather, with about half of their men went down. I stepped out of the Radio Shack and I was looking right in the water. We were right up on the edge like that. See, the Radio Shack was up about halfway up to the bridge and up above the main deck. And I was going back to my bunk. I was getting off watch, and the waves were really high. The wind was blowing bad. And I came out of there and I was looking right down in the water. I was looking for the deck below me to go down the ladder, see, and I was looking right in the water. But then we straightened up. But we were larger than most of the destroyers because we were a squadron leader. The others were smaller. They were big enough, but they weren't as big as we were. But 3 of our squadron went down that night from the weather. Of course, when it was over with, they steamed back through and picked up whoever they could find, you know, in the water, because the water was warm there where we were, and I guess they got about half of them. Wow. The other half went down when they tipped over. See what happens when you go into the wind. You try to hit the wave head on, so your bow might go under one and then over one like that. See, it goes over the bow, but you come up. But once in a while, and you come up like that, a wave will hit you on the side and they'll push over like this, and another one comes and hits you like that and knocks you right over. That's what happened to three of them, three of our destroyers that night. And I'm not sure whether, I think Halsey got called on the carpet for that, but it wasn't his fault. The tornado changed direction. He made the necessary turn to get away from it, but the whole fleet did, see. But we lost three that night, and then later on when I was on the carrier off Okinawa, or I think it was Okinawa, I got transferred to new construction because the country was building ships faster than the Japs could sink them. If you saw that fleet out there, I thought to myself, if I was an enemy, I'd get scared. As far as you could see was ships, our ships. We had 12 new carriers. We could put 1,000 planes in the air at one time. That was the Navy. Of course, the Army could put them in the air too. We had control of the air, and we felt pretty good. But as far as you could see, now you can only see about 12 miles. That's the horizon on the ocean. Then the ships start disappearing, see, you're over the ridge. But that whole ocean was solid ships, landing craft, carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers. If I'd have been an enemy, I'd have turned and ran. But anyway, we went on in. Now, when we got back there, of course, when you get transferred, new construction, you get a leave. So we came back and they transferred me to new construction, see. What they were doing, they were putting one man with experience, two men out of boot camp. Because they had to have crews for these ships, but they couldn't all be experienced. They were taking them out of boot camp, you know, three months or a couple of months experience, and then they trained like Marines, you know, in the camp. You didn't learn much seamanship, so they figured they had to have somebody there that had experience just to get everything in order, including the officers. They called them 90-day wonders, you know. You know what they are. Yeah. If they had college, they passed the test, they'd give them 3 months and send them out. They were officers, telling the old-timers what to do, and the old-timers knew more than they did. So that was one of the things, but it was necessary. Everybody understood that. But they sent me back, and I was at Bremerton there, and I guess I got 20 days leave, I guess, but we were there and we worked in offices. I could type, so I was doing jobs that the girls would put me to work in the offices there. They had a Navy base there, and offices, and waves working there. So then when we went aboard, they had what they called a shakedown cruise. So we went to sea. Of course, they couldn't go to war right away because they had to get everybody doing their jobs and make sure the equipment worked and everything. So we went down the west coast, down by Mexico, and we anchored and we went swimming right in the ocean. Didn't have any trouble, but then we went on through Panama Canal. They got a lake there that supplies that water, so we anchored there and went ashore in Panama. Then we went around to Norfolk, Virginia, loaded up with supplies for the Army and headed for Casablanca without an escort. Carrier without an escort. Submarines, the Germans were great for submarines, you know, they did a lot of damage in the early part of the war anyway. But we had a blimp with us, like they used on the football games. They were with us. They can see down deep and they tell us where the subs were, so we'd avoid them, see. We went across all right. Now and then we'd drop a 500-pound bomb overside and it would explode, you know, they had a timer on it. Just to let them know there was something around, and then hopefully they'd dive thinking it's a destroyer. That's just a trick that's supposed to scare them off. But we made it over to Casablanca, stayed there a few days, and then we came back with stuff they'd captured from the German Army. This is a carrier, it can carry a lot of stuff. No planes on it, can carry a lot of. We've come back, loaded up again, went across again. We went across twice and back. This was what we called a shakedown cruise, see. It was in harm's way, all right, but that place over there looked just like you see the Bible stories. The houses are close together and long. Go right over the building would be be right over the roads and stuff like that. And they had shops, just like you see in these Bible stories, that people are dressed that way. Arabs mostly, and others that lived there. I don't know who did have it at the time, but we parked there for a few days. We had what they call scuppers, and when we're at sea, you dump your garbage over the side because the seagulls and the fish get it as quick as it hits the water. It's not a dirty thing because it's usually food, see. So, but in port, we had to put it in these scuppers. Go out there after you put that stuff in, and people that lived there, the natives, they'd be down in there picking that over to eat. The dispersing officer stood there beside me, and I said, why don't you break out some of the turkeys we got frozen down there for Thanksgiving and give it to them? He said, if I did that, he said, the whole town would be here tomorrow. He said, I'd like to do it, but he said, I don't dare. He said, if those few people put out the word that we're putting whole turkeys out there, because we had our freezers full of food, see, turkeys for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I asked him, why don't you throw it out there and give it to them? He said, if I do that, the next day the whole town will be there after something, see, and he said, I don't dare do it. He said, I can't give it away. I can't give it all away. He said, I feel the same as you do, but he said, I can't do it. But they were eating out of that, taking that food. Of course, it wasn't old, but it's hot over there. See, it don't last for a lot of flies. So anyway, we got back, and we came to New York, and I went over to Columbia University. During the summertime when I was in high school, I used to go out to work at my uncle's out near Batavia there, Virgin, New York. And there was a girl that worked there, and she went to Albany State Teachers College in the winter, but lived at my uncle's place. She wasn't part of the family, she just worked there. And so I knew that she was over there. She got a job at Columbia University. So when I Liberty, I went up to see her. And me and her boyfriend and her, we went out to eat, visited, and of course that was only 5 days, or no, just Liberty. But while I was there, it was at Christmas time, so I took 5 days and I come up to the house. You get a train, come up in a day, you know. We didn't have much time, maybe 2 or 3 days at home, but I came home for Christmas. Then we went around back through the Panama Canal, went out where the action was. We got in on, when they retook the Philippines. I was trying to think of the name of the place we were. I'm getting old, I'm getting forgetful, but it was on the other side of the Philippines, and we got attacked by the suicide planes. You know, we shot it. Their whole air force was done, but they'd use these suicide. They put boys on them and tell them to crash them into our ships. See, and they didn't live. They killed themselves to get a hit. You know, and one of the admirals said that they did more damage with those. They had 3,000 of them, and they said they did more damage with those than the whole Jap Navy did during the war. Of course, that's a bold statement, but that's what he said anyway. He hit over 1,000 of our ships. You got to know we were pretty powerful if we could take that kind of hits and still carry on that war out there. You got to know we were pretty powerful, because our Air Corps was intact and the carriers stayed out. When they attacked them, they got an awful lot of anti-aircraft fire. They had lined right up along the deck, you know, and they'd fill the air black with anti-aircraft fire. But they'd come in. Our fighters would go meet them and shoot down some of them. Some of them would come, they'd get shot down by the anti-aircraft, and a few of them would get through and they'd crash onto our ships, see. Well, one of them come over us and we got him, the first shot. The other one hit the ship ahead of us, and I guess from what they said, they lost about 16 men. They have a bomb on them, 500-pound bomb. When they land, they make an explosion, see. They don't necessarily sink you, but they damage you, see. And in fact, I don't remember any carriers getting sunk. They got hit and they got damaged, but I don't remember any of them going down at Okinawa. The this, I'm sure it was on the other side of the Philippines where we were. And we had a big battle there too, and that's where the old battleships come in. They had a big battle there, and they crossed the T on the Jap Navy, if you've heard that. I don't know whether you've ever heard that. Crossing the T means this. If your line of ships are going in a straight line like this, if you can go across like this, they've only got the front ship that can shoot at you. You've got the whole fleet that can shoot at them. So they just shoot them as they come along and drop them right off. See, it's called crossing the T. We crossed the T on them there and did a lot of damage. And they got one group got through and they sunk a couple of our, they called them Kaiser's coffins. That's the ship I was on the last 18 months. That's the small carriers. They carry about 15 planes. There were a lot of them, so they did help. They helped the troops, help anywhere they needed. But they weren't like the big carriers. Big carriers would carry at least 80 planes. And they were part of the Halsey's fleet, but these were just individuals with small escorts. I'm sure that was at, all I can think of was Saginaw, but it wasn't Saginaw. It was at Bay on the other side of the Philippines. But anyway, the Japanese had put decoys way out in the ocean, pretending that they were coming down with a fleet. So Halsey knew about it, so he and his fleet went up to meet them. We had a big fleet, but they left these other ships to cover these. There were straits between those islands, so they couldn't get to where we were fighting, see. But one of the admirals didn't get the message, and he went with Halsey, and this one was open. So that bunch of Japs got through, and they sank 2 or 3 of our ships. But some of the ships were there that we had, they had destroyers laying smoke screens and everything, trying to protect them. And some of them got their planes in the air. They started attacking these Jap ships, and they thought it was Halsey, so they turned around and beat it. Of course, Halsey was up north, but Halsey had the big carriers with him, so he had a big fleet. But they were just decoys. He fell for decoys. I don't suppose people know that either. But that's another, while we're in there somewhere, we ran into another tornado. And we used human ballast. It was on the carrier. The carriers stick about the water a lot, see, and when the wind hits them, I guess they were afraid it would tip them over or something, but we didn't lose any ships there, but a lot of them were damaged. It hit us again. That was the second time we got hit. And our skipper put us on the hangar deck with ropes across the hangar deck, every few feet with knots in them. And we'd stand in the middle of the ship. He took all the guys they could get, about 10 guys to a rope. And when that ship would start to tip up, we'd climb those ropes. They called it human ballast. All ships have ballast to hold them upright. Yep. But he didn't figure that was enough, because that wind was strong. So he had us use what he called human ballast.
You climb the rope.
When that ship would begin to tip up, we'd climb up that rope, see? And when it'd go back down, we'd go back to the center. The wind was usually coming from one way, see? So you were watching it, and when the ship would start to tip up, we'd climb those ropes up. All of us would be up at the end. Now there'd be 10 guys to a rope and several ropes, see? It did make a difference. They settled back down, then we'd go back in the middle and wait and go again. But we got through that night. It did a little damage to the ships around the fleet, but I don't think we lost any that time. The first time we lost the 3 destroyers. But I heard somebody say that the weather did more damage than the Japs. But it did plenty at that. But, well, I guess let's see now. That'd be, we were there at Okinawa when the Japs, or when we fired the atomic bomb. Of course, we didn't know what it was. We didn't even know about it. But
were you able?
We were glad we had it, and they didn't. But they tried to. They had a battleship that was the biggest in the world. That had 18-inch guns. We had the biggest we had were 16-inch. I mean, those things weighed a ton. When they fired them, you could see them go just like a football lateral. you know, a long pass.
Yeah.
You could see the bullets go. I'm telling you, we used to, when we were shooting targets, you could stand there and watch them. When we had 8 on the battleship West Virginia, we had 2 in each turret, and when they turned sideways like that and fired at once, that ship would jump like that. Well, if you were standing there, you'd fall, you'd knock you right off your feet. I know I went up to watch them one night. They were having night battle practice, see, and they were shooting these star shells up, and then they were shooting at a target about 10 miles away. They were laying those big shells. They must have weighed close to a ton, right in that target, about the side of that wall. They were laying those big shells right in that. It was a piece of canvas, but you could see it hit. But you could see, I was surprised you could see those bullets go, and they went like this at first, and then as they got to the target, they looked just like they fell right in behind each other. They looked like somebody throwing a long lateral pass. But right in the target. But that was just that was target practice, see, when I saw that. But
Were you able to see anything with the atomic bomb then, or no, either one?
what's this?
Were you able to see anything when the atomic bombs were dropped? Did you see any of the
We
clouds?
didn't know what it was. We heard about it, but I was
Oh, okay. You weren't able to see
didn't even know what it was. But we were there. I mean, we were in Okinawa. You can see it was one of the southern islands where the army was fighting the Japs there. The Japs let us land there. They had their line way back, so we got a big force ashore there, and they had quite a battle. But the commander of the Japs committed suicide because he couldn't hold. And on that one, I just told you, he tried to commit suicide, but he didn't make it. He was tried and hung. You see, it wasn't so much the people, it was the leaders that had these atrocities. And of course they were made to pay for it after the war.
Right, Man King and
The soldiers did what they were told to do, see, and more or less they weren't any different than the rest of us. But you know, you've probably seen them talk after the war, soldiers of enemies and ours. And of course, the British and the Americans tried to go by the Geneva Conference and do what it said, treatment of prisoners and everything, but the rest of them didn't. They killed prisoners left and right, you know that.
Yeah.
People, they tried to wipe out whole people.
You were never a prisoner?
No, I promised myself I wasn't going to be. I didn't like the way, I knew once they had a hold of you, you couldn't do nothing about it. And I've had stories about that too, from guys that survived it.
There's a guy in Canastota that was in Stalag in the European battles, and he's one of the guys that's going to talk too.
Yeah.
And he was an Italian soldier actually.
Yeah.
Who got captured. But
We had a few here too that were prisoners.
Yeah.
The guy down there, the head of the veterans at the courthouse where I worked, he was captured, and he was German, but he had a Jewish name, and he was sweating it because he was captured, and he just kept quiet. Because the Germans would look at the names and see what their names were, then they put them in these camps for extermination, Well, I mean, that was a hell of a thing, Germany would have been wiped right out if this happened a couple of years, 100 years ago, and they lost. After what they did, they'd have been wiped right out, sure as the world. Because everybody, they'd be so mad. I mean, you can't wipe out people that way. Well, that was terrible. I mean, the Russians lost 20 million, and the Jews lost 6 million, just destroyed. I mean, some of them weren't even fighting. They were just gotten away,
When did you find out that the war was over?
Well, right after that bomb dropped.
The second one?
Yeah, well, whatever it was out there.
Yeah.
See, we just heard that we had a weapon and it was pretty good and everything, and we were just glad the Japs didn't have it. And so we came back to Pearl, and we came back to the States, and they gave me 35 days rehabilitation leave. Now, when you go in the Navy, they say you rate 30 days a year. Now, that's pretty good for vacation for every year. You got to admit that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Usually had more vacation than you had money to spend on it. I don't know whether you know how that goes. $21 when you first go in, and 36 after you get aboard, and then if you make seaman, you get 54. That's a month. So, of course you got your room and board and your clothes and everything, and it was an experience. You got to travel and everything. But I guess I was second class petty officer when I come out. But I got 35 days rehabilitation leave, and I went ashore there in some army camp or marine camp or something. Boy, those camps were big. They had buildings. They all looked the same. They all had streets. They all were numbered. And we all went over there. There was quite a few of us that had been in the Navy quite a while, and they were letting us have leave. See, I'd had maybe, I rated 30 a year, but I got maybe 30 in the whole 6 years. So I had a little coming. But they gave me 35 days, they called it rehabilitation leave. You had to carry a sea bag. You seen those sea bags that sailors carry that got your clothes and everything in it? I was carrying that, and I put it in a barracks there. Of course, I didn't think to look at the number, because they were all numbered, and there was hundreds of them, barracks. They said, come on over to the administration building. They went over there, and they had somebody looking at their record and everything, and stamped it and said, all right, you've got 35 days. The bus is waiting for you out there. Here, my sea bag was down a few rows in a place I had forgot where it was. I didn't look to see the number. I thought we'd be there for a day or two, you know. So I run out, I started looking around, and you think I could find that? I looked, and they all looked the same. I had learned that the first day I was in the Navy, not to get caught like that, because you go into a port, you go ashore, and then when you got to come back, you don't know where you're going. You can walk all over the place. I learned that right at the beginning. Look for something that stands out like a water pipe or something. It's right near where your ship is. When you over there, when you start getting ready to go back, you look for that water pipe, and that's where your ship is. I learned that right in the beginning. The last day, I forgot to do that. Here I was, wandering around those buildings. They all looked the same. The bus was ready to leave. All the guys on board and everything. And I was cussing myself, why, you damn fool, you knew that the first day you were in here. But luckily I walked in one, and there sat my sea bag, so I grabbed it and I got on. Next thing I knew, on a train heading east. We knew the war was over because every little whistle stop you went through, people were out celebrating. They had signs, the war is over and everything. They were having a great time. All the whole towns were out celebrating, see. And I sat there and I was thinking, boy, am I tired. I just sat there and watched it, and I said, well, what now? I was thinking over my 6 years, you know, and I hadn't been hurt at all. And I was thinking how lucky I was. We lost 105 on the West Virginia the first day there, but we weren't at war at that time. But I was pretty lucky that way. I didn't get hurt. Oh, you get kind of, there's a lot of noise, a lot of explosions, you know, and you feel it. You feel the explosion, it makes a lot of noise. You feel like you're shell shocked, but there wasn't any, I wasn't damaged. I didn't get hit. I look around, I didn't see any blood flowing, so I didn't, it was shrapnel that would fly from bombs and different things, but we were pretty lucky that way. You see, the 2 years that were most important to my career were on that destroyer. That was the beginning of the war, and we were hard pressed there in the beginning because they outnumbered us 10 to 1, and we had to be careful. We couldn't get trapped somewhere because the west coast would be wide open because the other part of the Navy was in the Atlantic, and we were the only ones out there, so we had to be careful. I remember somebody, when I got home, everybody said, well, where's the Navy? Well, I just told you where the Navy was. We couldn't afford to get trapped, you know. We had this hit and run and stuff like that for a while until the other fleet began to come out there. Got new battleships, new cruisers, well, you know, the Missouri and the Dakota and the Washington and all of them, and the new carriers. We lost all our original carriers except the Enterprise. I'm not sure about the Saratoga. It seemed to me that every time she went out, she'd catch a fish. That means a torpedo. she'd have to go back in and get repairs. It seemed so every time she'd man break his legs or something in the explosion. We'd hear about it, see, but she'd have to turn around, go back and get repairs. But I don't know, maybe on towards the end she might have got sunk, I don't know. I know the rest of them did, except the Enterprise. In fact, the Yorktown, I had my sights on her when she got hit. I was on a destroyer. Did I mention that?
Yep.
And a submarine got her that night. It actually sank the destroyer that was alongside, and they didn't have their depth charge was set on certain depth. Somebody didn't turn them off. When they have them ready to shoot in the water, they go off at certain depths.
Yep.
Somebody didn't turn them back on safe. When the destroyer went down, she broke the back of the Yorktown, and the Yorktown went down too. Yorktown didn't get sunk by the Japs. Those depth charges sunk her, our own. And we sunk the Lex, my ship did. I probably didn't tell you about that, did I? Well, that was in the early part of the war down the Coral Sea. And we attacked them and they attacked us. And they hit the Lex. We got one of their carriers and they hit the Lex. And she steamed all day long at 25 knots. You wouldn't know anything was wrong. No smoke or nothing, just steaming along. Late in the afternoon, the officer come back, he said, "We're going to lose the Lex, boys." Everybody say, "Why?" "She's all right, look at her go." They carry aviation gas, see, for the planes, and they also carry bombs. The fire got started down below during the attack, and they were fighting it all that time, but gradually it was gaining on them, going through and getting into the bombs and the gas, getting worse. Finally, about late in the day, she stopped, and she sat there and the smoke began to come up, and she started a list, and the fleet was all there, see, and so what they did, they knew she couldn't make it, so the fleet took the crew, what was left, so they weren't dead, they took them aboard. We had a few aboard our ship too. Then the fleet left, and they left us there and told us to make sure she goes down. They didn't want the Japs to capture it and tow it in, because she hadn't gone down, she was burning. There were girders on there big as these bridges around here, those steel bridges, going up 200 feet in the air. We had to get back out of the way so that some of that stuff didn't drop on us. And we'd sit back there a quarter of a mile away and that stuff was flying, explosions, see. But she still didn't sink. She was listing and sat there, well, so around dark, you could still see that she was like this and the water was near this flight deck, but this side was up. She didn't seem to be going down. So we put 2 fish in one side of her, then we went around the other side and put 3 in the other side. It was dark by now, see, and that fire that was on the deck there, when she went down, that fire went out, and everybody was standing there just like this, watching a great lady die. Because they called the ship a she, you know. And these guys we'd been with that carrier right up till now. And it's quite a thing. There's a lot of emotion there, you know. And these guys weren't easy guys. They were tough guys. Everybody's standing there just like that, watching her go. All of a sudden, there was one hell of an explosion. Big white light. We thought we'd been torpedoed because we were sitting still, see. That'd be an easy target for a submarine. We had an admiral aboard, and apparently, I don't know, he hadn't been aboard before, but I think probably, from what I understood now, you know, stories get around, you don't know whether they're true or not, so I won't say it's true, but he was aboard. When that happened, we have a talk between ship radio that only the ships can hear, nobody else can hear it. But you can hear it, and you can hear the fighter planes, or hear the planes too. But he grabbed that phone, he called the fleet commander who'd left with the fleet, send back a ship to pick up survivor, we had our fantail blown off. That admiral gave the order, see. But he was kind of a passenger there, he wasn't part of the ship's crew.
Right.
And everybody started checking around, the captain, the regular captain called back aft, how are things back there? I said, okay. Called around, nothing wrong. It was Lexington's blowing up that made the big explosion.
Really?
We hadn't been hit. The guys were sitting in life rafts because they thought we'd been hit. I grabbed my life jacket and put it on, and they all did the same thing. And he had to call back. The admiral didn't say, belay that last word, we're not sinking. The leader of the fleet called back and said, well, make up your mind, you're sinking or aren't you? He said, we're not sinking. We'll explain later. There's a lot of red faces there, you know, because, well, we really thought we'd been hit. One more thing I'd like to mention that I thought was strange. We had detected a jet fleet somewhere, but they were a long ways off, see. And they're afraid to get so far away that they couldn't get back to the carrier, and we couldn't afford to lose our planes. So, but they sent them out anyway because there was supposed to be a good hit that they wanted to make. They didn't think the Japs were aware that we were there and we could get a good hit on them without them hitting us. Well, I was on the gun crew there, and it was nice there, you know, down in the South Seas. I don't know if you ever heard of the Southern Cross, but that's stars in the sky, Southern Cross. You see that every night there. It's really something people pay a lot to go see, you know. It was nice that way. We were on the gun crew and we were just watching things. There wasn't anything going on. But we were sitting off a little off to one side of the carrier. And they were, as the planes come back, they had to hurry to make it. See, they couldn't waste any time in the circle because they were running out of gas, see. Well, they were taking on planes, and it was getting dark. It had got dark, and they turned their searchlights on. They don't usually do that at night because that makes you a target.
Invisible.
But they turned them on to get their pilots back, to show them where they were so they wouldn't have to waste time looking, and they find them at night, you know. And one of the carriers called the other and said, how many planes you got up yet? He said, we've got all of ours in, how much you got? He said, well, we've only got 3 up, and there's about 10 in the landing square. They were Japs. Got fouled up, got lost, and were in our landing circle. They didn't know it was us. Now, you'd think they'd have radio that they could talk. They probably did. They must have thought their radio was out or something, because they were in the landing circle getting ready to land on our carriers. But the one skipper told the other, he called the pilot and said, get out of the landing circle, you got Japs. We're going to start shooting. So, of course, the 3 pilots were still in the landing circle. They took off to get away from there. And they began shooting. Of course, the Japs didn't do anything. They just disappeared. They beat it. They were in the wrong carrier, see. They got lost, apparently. But the 3 pilots had got lost. I mean, they couldn't find their way back. So they radioed them and told them where the nearest island was, where they could land in the water and maybe be picked up. And so that's what they did. They found this island. They gave them directions to it. The carrier called them. And they landed in the water and went ashore, and a couple weeks later they came back aboard. They survived. But that was an interesting thing. The Japanese in our landing circle, a long ways away, they got lost too, must be. But they didn't do anything. They didn't shoot at us or try anything. Well, they just beat it. Maybe they were all out of bounds or something, because that was one of the interesting things that happened out there that kind of fooled you, you know. Yeah. There was a lot of talk about that for a while. I don't know whether you've ever heard of flying fish or not, but down in the South Pacific, they're not wings, they're fins. They're a fish maybe this long, but their fins, the side fins, come down along, and when they swim, they lay alongside of them. They get up on a wave and they spread those wings. They don't fly, they glide. Yep. And they'll glide maybe 100 feet and land in the water again. We had 3 or 4 of them come right aboard. The skipper said, hey, save them, they're good eating. So he had them for dinner. But that's one of the things in the South Seas that you don't expect to see. I mean, nobody knew about them. I didn't anyway. Flying fish. Yeah.
Were they good eating? Did you ever get to try them?
Just the captain. There was only 3 of them that landed. And he said, save them, I want them. So he ate them. He said they're good eating. So he's the only one that knows. Boy, going over the line was something. When you go over the line, there's a initiation, you know, when you go over the equator. And half of the crew hadn't been over, including the captain. They got even with him on that day. He did what he was told. They had him on the bow with a peak coat on, this down near the equator with a peak coat on, with a couple Coke bottles taped together, and like spyglasses, and he was supposed to report every 15 minutes that he couldn't see the equator yet. He'd look out there. No equator yet, sir. He was talking to some junior officers. He was a captain. They made him do that as initiation. See, surprisingly, he was a tough nut. He looked like I don't know whether you know Skinny Gates up here on the Gates farm, Danny's father. He looked just like him, only he was short and kind of a 5x5. But his name was Bruce Edward Schofield Trippensey. The guys called him B.E.S.T. Rippensey. B.E.S.T. Rippensey. They kidded it about his name. But he made it a point to be best at everything he was. His initials spelled B.E.S.T. He tried to be best at anything he did, and he was at the top of his class in Annapolis. And every job he had in the Navy, he made it a point to be best, and by God, I think he was. We had trouble once. We were underway during a battle. We were steaming at 35 knots, and the boilers gave out. Something happened down in the boiler room, and we started to stop. At that time, with the battle going on, you don't want to be standing still. He come off of that bridge like a ball. Down there, he never touched the ladder. He's right down, and he come down the deck. And they have their entrance ways that go down below. They're about that big around, and that ladder goes down into the fire room, and where the boilers are, and where the engines are, engine room. He come off of that bridge, and he bounded down there like a rubber ball, and he went right down through there, and that ship never lost headway. He knew what to do. He was a good man. I mean, he knew see, when you go in the Navy as an officer, they put you to work maybe at gunnery officer for a while, and you learn all there is to know, and then maybe you advance a little. In peacetime, it was slow. Advancements were slow. And then they'd put him in engineering. That means down below there. You learn all there is to know about that. Then you get into communications, and you learn all there is to that. And eventually, you just work your way up to lieutenant, commander, and then next is commander, then captain, see, 4-striper. That's next to an admiral. That's how they work their way up, see. Well, a lot of these officers were 90-day wonders. But they were pretty good, though. I mean, they were good guys. Some of them thought they were better than they really were, and the guys really had a rough time. They wanted to fight. I mean, the officers did, because the guys were kidding them, you know. They were just grinning at them when they didn't know what they were doing, you know. And boy, one of them, he was ready to fight. He put near tore my jacket off once. It wasn't anybody's fault. I didn't do anything that I knew I was doing, but when you make liberty, why the officers, when you go on a boat, a launch, the officers go first, see. When you land, you wait for them to get off the boat first. Well, I got up, I knew that. I got up and I looked around the boat to see if there was any officers aboard. Now, their hats are white, same as the sailors are, but they're different. They have a bill on them. And I didn't see any officers, so another guy and I were both radiomen. We jumped onto the dock and ran up the stairs up onto the street level. I got about halfway up that stairs, and something grabbed me right here by my jacket and yanked it. Pretty near tore my jacket right off. That's the Navy. They're pretty tough stuff, you know. I turned around like this, and it was an officer, the executive officer of our ship. I hadn't seen him. I wouldn't have done that if I'd have seen him, but I didn't see him. Boy, he just about tore my jacket right off. He said, "You go back and wait for the next liberty." and the other guy was a rated man with me. I was a seaman, he was a second class petty officer. We both got caught. So we stood there and we got talking, and he didn't say go back to the ship. He said wait for the next Liberty Party. So we didn't go back to the ship. We just stood there, and when the next Liberty Party come, we went on Liberty. The next day, of course, he checked when he got back to the ship to see if we'd reported in. That means we'd had to go back to the ship on a boat, maybe a mile away, you see. We didn't want to waste that time. But we got talking, and he didn't say go back to the ship. He said wait for the next Liberty ship. So we went on Liberty just as soon as the next Liberty ship boat come on. So the next day, a guy come down, hey, the exec wants to talk to you. I knew what it was. I went up there. He said, did you guys come back to the ship yesterday? And I said, no. He said, didn't I tell you to wait for the next Liberty Party? I said, yes, you did. That's what we did. We waited right there. Well, he said, at least you got your stories straight. The other guy told him the same thing, see, the petty officer. He talked to him first. He said, well, at least you got your stories straight. He didn't do anything about it. He said, next time, he said, you know, officers first. I said, I knew it, I just didn't see you. But he was always getting in fights with the sailors. He was a tough guy, and he was a drunk too. I mean, he drank a lot. I knew a guy from his hometown, see, and he was on the ship with us, and he told me once, he said, he was a drunk back home. He said but he happened to be smart enough to pass those tests, so they made an officer out of him. I guess he was a good officer. He became exec, and that's second in command on the ship. So he was all right, but but the guy said he's a drunk back home. He said he was a bum. It takes all kinds, you know. Heck, I never amounted to anything either at home. Of course, the reason I didn't get anywhere in the Navy is because I kept getting shifted around. I was on the deck force, then in the print shop, then back on the deck force, and into radio, then I got transferred 3 or 4 times and ended up second class radioman. I was a petty officer all right, but I could send and receive code, Morse code and stuff like that, and did my job. But a lot of the work was just like farm work, painting and shining bright work and mopping decks and swab jockey, you know. Well, I see, I don't know, there's probably a lot of things I forgot. I'm 92 years old, so, you know, there's only 2 girls that were in my class. Fran Metcalf, she's a grassmire. She lived up there on School Street. Betsy Benson, a farm up here. She became a teacher, and the other one became a nurse. But they were in my class at school. Art Williams up on the hill here, he's in my class. But the other one is in California. He became an engineer, and he lives in California. He come to the reunion. We go have a reunion every year down here, down the Rusty Rail. They come back once in a while. He came back, and they always called him Reverend because he was a 7-day Adventist. All the people in school called him Reverend Walker. He didn't mind. But I saw him knock, no, I went the other way around. You remember, you know, Kelsey down here in the farm? Fran, he just died here. He was a year ahead of me in school, so he wasn't in my class, but he just died recently. He was quite a cheerleader, and he was a good coach. I mean, not a coach, but a referee at the games. You've probably seen him. Anyway, his boys were pretty good runners, and so was he. I never saw him get beat. He could run like mad, a mile. He'd run from the farm over here to school in the morning. When he got on those circular miles, he'd be coming in while the rest were just making a turn down here. I saw him do that. I never saw him get beat. Of course, I was basketball and baseball, but I did high jump and broad jump in a couple of meets because the baseball season was over. But I saw him run. But Kelsey and this Reverend, they're both farmers, see. And I don't know what started it, but they got in a hassle down in the gym. And this Walker picked Kelsey up and walked him right up the stairs and threw him out the side door right out in the parking lot. And he went back down below. Kelsey picked himself up and he walked back down and he let him have one and he knocked him out. He knocked the Reverend out, hit him right side the head with a roundhouse. I reminded the Reverend when he come to the reunion, he come back east once in a while, he comes back and goes to the reunion. And I reminded him of it. I said, I saw you get knocked out one time. He said, yeah, he said, Kelsey did it. I said, he did. He knocked me right out, he said. I said, you carried him up the stairs. They both were strong farm boys, see. To carry Kelsey up the stairs and put him out the door, it must have been a pretty good chore. But he did it. Kelsey picked himself up, went back down and let him have one. Knocked him right out. I told that to his wife too. Boy, his daughter lives right across here, Margaret. She's one of Kelsey's daughters.